Hello and welcome to Expedition Homestead. My name is Ripley. On this channel here, we build your passion for growing through simple, effective, yet affordable ways of maintaining our gardens and increasing your harvest. If you're anything like me, you've been doing tons of research online to try to figure out how to increase your tomato harvest to get the beautiful red giant tomatoes that you want, or even perhaps you want some incredible small cherry tomatoes as well. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the most transformative way that I have found to increase my tomato harvest, and that is through the single stem method. If you've never done this before, it is very easy to do. And trust me, it's going to give you the best fruit possible. It's going to decrease the amount of disease that you have in your plants as well. And instead of producing tons and tons of vegetative growth, you're going to be producing that fruit that we really want in the end. Let's get a little bit closer to show you exactly how I maintain these tomatoes in this way. Here in one of our tomato beds, we have a prime example to show you how we've been preparing and maintaining these tomatoes as they grow. This is going to do a couple of different things. It's going to redirect energy away from the foliage of the leaves and into the fruit instead. And it's also going to open up for airflow in the plant. And by doing so, we reduce the amount of disease that our plants are susceptible to. Now, we do this entire process in stages. We don't cut off all the foliage at once. We do want to make sure we get all the suckers as quick as we can because they turn into giant plants all by themselves very, very quickly. And here our goal is to grow one solid tomato stem, not several different stems that are going to be growing into a bush type pattern. Now, these are indeterminate varieties. If you have a determinate variety, that tomato plant is only going to grow so big, so you're going to want to use a different method when growing determinate tomatoes, but these are all indeterminate, so they would just keep growing and vining out and turning into a wild jungle of tomatoes if we let them. As you can tell down below on these plants, I've gotten rid of most of the foliage. I'm going to go through and cut a couple more off of that one. Cut off any other lower foliage that I've got right now. And then I'll show you what a sucker looks like just in case you've never seen one before or paid enough attention to your tomato plant to see how crazy these things grow. This branch I just cut off a little bit earlier in the video, leaving this sucker behind. This is what we want to cut off, or you can also pinch it off with your finger just like that. Another thing your tomato plants will do is split. Right here you see how it forks off there. It's not quite lateral like a sucker is. It's a little bit more vertical. This is also something we want to avoid. And we'll cut that right off. Oh, and also, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, join the community, comment down below if you'd like to. Let's have some good gardening fun together, learn together, and grow together. Now, you might be wondering how we got these tomatoes to stand up without falling over due to wind damage and storms. Again, let's take a closer look, and I'll show you exactly how we did that as well. 2x2s, fence post, string or baling twine. And then I will leave a link in the description below to these handy dandy vegetable clips. They just clip right onto the string, and as the tomatoes grow, I will simply clip them onto the tomatoes and the string, and they are not going anywhere whatsoever. Very, very good way to do this. It's a lot better than the Florida weave method. I've never had a tomato tip over when doing this unless it was at fault of the string itself. So I have learned that hemp string over the season does tend to become a little bit brittle. So this year I'm trying this just plain old white string that you can find at any store near you. Otherwise, baler twine, we had a hot tip from one of our viewers that they've used that, and essentially it's about a 170-pound weight that it can support. So baling twine will definitely not go anywhere, but just be a little bit aware of using hemp string because I have had problems with that in previous seasons. To give you an idea of how drastic you can be with your pruning with these tomato plants, this is how these tomato plants looked before I did a major pruning on them, and here is what they looked like afterwards. You don't have to worry about only taking 25%, 35, or even 45% of the foliage off. You can really do a very heavy pruning on the foliage and the suckers of these plants, and they'll do just fine. An added bonus is that you can also take those suckers and propagate them, so you can grow whole new tomato plants with those suckers if you would like to, and you've got about 100 days left in your growing season. You'll be harvesting tomatoes from those plants as well, so you can multiply your harvest that way. Like I said earlier, this is one of the simplest and most effective ways to multiply your tomato harvest besides fertilizing. If you don't know how to fertilize your tomatoes or what they're looking for, generally you're going to want to fertilize your tomatoes with one that is higher in the phosphorus value. So if you don't have a fertilizer that has a high source of phosphorus, you can also grind up bone meal or calcium into your compost or fertilizer that you're making at home. That is a great additive that can increase your phosphorus. Otherwise, just give it a Google. There's a ton of different recipes that you can use to create tomato fertilizers at home. That's a whole nother topic for a different video. We have 10 tomato plants, all heirloom varieties, growing in this bed here. And then we have 5 more growing over with our beans as a little experiment. I really wanted to see how they would do growing right with the beans, and so far we've had no effects whatsoever. Anything that they might have had is just completely negligible at this point, except for we had some pole beans go to seed last year, and obviously we didn't get all the seeds out because they're starting to get all over this bed. So I have had to cut off any pole beans that happen to be growing in here, because those will tighten up really tight along the tomato and then be detrimental to their growth. But besides that, these tomatoes that are grown right in with the beans are doing great, doing really good, producing just as much fruit as the other plants. Now they are different varieties as those, which is why they don't look so big, but the fruit sets on them are doing very well. Everything looks nice and healthy. I'm not getting any sort of leaf curl or disease whatsoever, which again, because we are single stemming these and pruning them, I'm not going to be apt to those types of problems. The one problem I will say that we've had a little bit more this year than last year's is that we just have flowers that are dropping here a little bit more frequently than I would like to see. But as long as I get about 3 or 4 nice, solid, heavy tomatoes on each of these sets, that makes me happy, because I know they're going to be producing very, very good fruit on those sets. So as far as why some of the leaves are dropping, I'm not sure. It could be several different reasons. A few of the most common reasons why we get blossom drop on our tomato plants is going to be high temperatures above 85 degrees and cold nighttime temperatures below 55 degrees, as well as irregular watering. Now, I could put shade cloth over this whole thing if I wanted to, but I'm just not that interested in putting all that extra work into the garden, because I know the tomatoes that are being produced will still have a ton of energy being directed into them, and they're going to be very, very nutritious, healthy tomatoes at that. So if I was getting every single blossom dropping off, then I might put shade cloth over this. But again, I want to garden cheaply, effectively, and simply. I'm not too worried about producing the most perfect harvest available in the world, but I do want the fruit that I harvest to be nice, juicy, plump, nutritional fruit. And I know I'm going to get that no matter what. But if you are very, very worried about it, you could put some shade cloth over that. Now, as far as regular watering goes, we've been really, really lucky this year to have rains come through about every few days during the month of July so far. In late June, we had a couple of weeks where we didn't have much water at all, and that was the worst that it got, where I actually had to be out here and water the garden before we had a series of drought days and then very, very hot temperatures right after that. I did have to water before that point, but otherwise I really haven't had to do any watering whatsoever in the garden, so it's been an absolute blessing. I'll show you a couple of reasons as to why we don't have to water as much, and maybe this is something that you can implement into your gardens if you haven't already done so. So let's take a close look at the soil and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. To give you a clue, it's in all of our walkways, it's in our compost, it's in our flower beds, and it's in our vegetable beds. It is this stuff right here, the wood chips. The wood chips help keep that soil very, very moist underneath. Just beautiful soil underneath that stuff. And it is also breaking down over time. It is adding to the organic material that is in the soil. So I think overall we have some very, very good benefits to growing with wood chips in the soil. Now, I'm not saying you have to have wood chips in your garden. Everything we do here is situational. For me, it just happens to work out really, really well to be growing in these raised garden beds and to have wood chips growing in them for water retention and weed suppression. But if I weren't growing in these raised beds, I probably wouldn't have the wood chips at all. Take a quick break from the tomatoes because we've got to harvest these cucumbers before they mature. You want to get your cucumbers off the vine when they are ripe like this, because if they get too old, that's going to send some conflicting signals to your cucumber plant. You don't want that. Probably eaten a cucumber in, I don't know, 3 different videos this year already. I love them. They're so good. You could never grow enough cucumbers in your garden. If you grow too many, give them away. This time of year is just crazy. We have so much to harvest here. Even though we've done succession planting, there's a ton of it that is just ready at one point. We've got turnips, beets, radishes, kohlrabi, bush beans, peas, lettuce that's about to bolt, so I have to collect those seeds before they spread throughout my entire garden. I learned that lesson in the past. So back to the wood chips. I know you're thinking, well, Ripley, you love wood chips more than anything else in the garden, and that I do. I'll tell you, I love using wood chips because of how much of an impact I believe it has to the garden overall. But if I were growing in native soil here and I had nice spread out single row gardens just like they used to do it in the old days, I wouldn't have wood chips for a couple of reasons. One, I would just be laying over all of my old foliage and my green growth and the cuttings from my garden every single year. I would lay it over the soil in the rows that I'm growing in, and then that would be building up the organic soil. While I do that in these raised beds too, the reason why I wouldn't have wood chips is because if we're growing natively in the soil, I'm not just going to take dump trucks, many dump trucks full of wood chips and dump them over a large, expansive area. Luckily, we have this nice small space we can work with, so it doesn't take that many. The wood chips are free from the city, so it's pretty cost effective and labor effective as well. But if we had any larger of an area, which we will have in the future, I would probably do away with the wood chips because we'd have all of these rows where I would have to weed. And in that case, we would take a stirrup hoe and we would be chunking along these rows with that stirrup hoe, and that's going to be cutting down and taking off of all of these weeds. But if we had all of the wood chips there, it would be a lot harder to take care of those weeds at that point than it is right now in this small area. So This goes back to what I was saying earlier. Everything we do in the garden is situational. There's no single way that you should be gardening or I should be gardening. Because let's face it, gardening is all about the experiences that we build throughout the years to see how we do best with our plants and our certain climate and our certain growing area. Because somebody 100 miles down the road might have to grow in a completely different way than I do in the first place. So you can't just go online and figure that you'll be able to Google any question you might have in your garden and you will grow the best kohlrabi ever. Or you will grow the best onions in the world if you follow those rules. Or your tomatoes are going to be the greatest ever if you follow what that person says you should do in your garden. Ultimately, it's up to you. You've got to build those experiences. You've got to build that knowledge for your space and your garden. And however you do that, I commend you for growing food in the first place, because that's what it's all about. If you're growing food, then you're already ahead of 95% of people in this world. A lot of people, especially in the United States, just unfortunately don't have the space to grow food or simply do not have the time. Me and my family, we are blessed to have the time to be able to maintain the garden, and thanks to you and your support, we're able to do that as well. So I hope you're taking the steps that you need to today to start growing food, whether it be in a couple of buckets or a couple of raised beds or in the ground natively through building up the soil and creating that incredibly nutritionally dense soil that our plants need. You can do that however you want to. There's so many different ways you can do it. The number one thing is that you just get started today. Well, thank you all so much for watching today's episode. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope your tomatoes thrive as well. Happy gardening, and we'll see you in the next episode.